I never imagined that at just 14 years old, I'd come face to face with my own mortality. But there I was, hooked up to machines in a cold hospital room, barely able to move. All I could do was watch my parents hover nearby, their eyes filled with fear they tried so hard to hide. Even the steady beeping of the machines felt overwhelming. I remember thinking, this can't really be it for me, right? Yet at the same time, I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. I wanted to tell my mom and dad not to worry, that I wasn't afraid of dying, but I didn't have the strength to get the words out. My name is Kayla. What I'm about to share is both the most terrifying and the most beautiful experience I've ever had. Before it happened, I was just a regular teenage girl. My life revolved around school, friends, social media, and family. It all started with a headache. Nothing serious at first, just a dull throb that wouldn't quite go away. I tried all the usual remedies, drinking more water, cutting back on screen time, taking breaks from homework. My parents shrugged it off, too. Everyone gets headaches, right? But within a week, the pain grew unbearable, and it didn't stop there. I got so tired I could hardly focus in class. Sometimes I'd feel dizzy, like the world was spinning. My friends joked that I was just stressed, but I knew something else was going on. When my mom finally took me to our family doctor, she expected a simple explanation, maybe migraines. But after a series of tests, the doctor walked in looking grave. He used words like rare condition and complications. I didn't fully grasp the medical jargon, but I did understand the worry in my parents' eyes and the fear creeping into my own heart. In the span of a few days, my life changed completely. We saw specialist after specialist. They prescribed different medications, recommended treatments, but nothing seemed to work. The headaches pounded harder, the fatigue worsened, and I felt my strength slipping away as though every day was pulling me further from my normal life. My school books started gathering dust because I was too exhausted to read. My friends texted me constantly, but I barely had energy to reply. Eventually, my body gave up, and I ended up in the hospital. The hospital felt like a cold maze of white walls and metallic sounds. The smell of disinfectant burned my nostrils, and the machines made an endless chorus of beeps and whirs. Nurses and doctors came and went, but none of them carried the solution we desperately wanted. I remember overhearing whispers in the hallway. She might not have much time, and we've tried everything we can. I was only 14, lying in a hospital bed, feeling life slip away more each minute. My parents clutched at my hands, as if they could somehow will their strength into me. It was heartbreaking to see them so helpless. I wanted to tell them I was at peace, but by then I could barely lift my head, let alone talk. I drifted in and out of consciousness, each moment feeling more distant from the world. My body was just too weak, time blurred. I have fuzzy memories of my mom reading Bible verses by my bedside and my dad pacing the hallway, talking to doctors or praying under his breath. Every breath felt like an effort. Darkness settled over my vision, and my last thought before slipping away was, is this really the end for me? The next thing I knew, I wasn't in my bed at all. I was floating, literally hovering, above the hospital room. It was the strangest feeling, like a sudden weightlessness. I saw my own body lying there, pale and unmoving, the heart monitor's alarm blaring. My parents were crying, and the doctors were rushing around frantically. I wanted to shout, "I'm fine. Look, I'm right here," but no one could hear me. It felt surreal. No pain, no heaviness, just a strange calm. That calm was interrupted by a bright, dazzling light that suddenly appeared in a corner of the room. At first, it was the size of a small circle, but then it expanded until it seemed to fill the entire space. It was indescribably beautiful, whiter than any light I'd ever seen, but not harsh. It was warm and comforting, the way sunlight might feel on a perfect spring day. I felt it calling me, drawing me in. Without hesitation, I moved toward the light, and as I entered it, everything changed. I found myself in a place so stunning I could hardly breathe from the beauty all around me. It was a garden, but it felt more alive than any garden on earth. The colors were beyond vivid. Blues, greens, pinks, and shades I'd never seen before. Flowers swayed gently, their fragrance sweeter than anything I could describe, almost like fresh-baked pastries and wildflowers combined. I walked barefoot on soft, lush grass that seemed to welcome every step. The air was crisp, with a hint of something sweet, like a bakery at dawn, but also fresh, like morning dew. Soft music drifted from somewhere, a harmony of voices and instruments that blended in a way I'd never heard in my life. It made me feel entirely peaceful and loved. As I stood there marveling, I noticed a figure approaching. He wore a simple white robe, but it shone with its own gentle light. I can't fully explain how I recognized him, but I knew immediately. This was Jesus. I'd seen pictures in Sunday school, but none of them captured the warmth and love in his eyes. "Welcome, Kayla," he said, smiling at me as if I were a long-lost friend. His voice held a kindness that put me at ease in an instant. Without thinking, I found myself rushing forward, and the moment I wished I could hug him, I was already in his arms. That hug? There are no words to describe it. It felt like every ounce of love in the universe was wrapped around me, filling every part of my being. The fear, the pain, everything that had plagued me just melted away. Jesus gently took my hand. "Come," he said. "There's so much I want to show you." We began to walk through the garden, and with each step, I felt a new kind of energy flowing through me, as if every cell in my body was being restored. We reached a magnificent tree with fruit that seemed to glow from the inside out. It sparkled, each piece reflecting hues of gold and amber. Jesus picked one, handed it to me, and said, "Eat." The moment I bit into it, I tasted a flavor that kept changing, sometimes sweet like honey, other times slightly tart like the freshest peach. With each bite, I felt an incredible surge of health and strength. I had never felt so alive, not even before I got sick. I had so many questions, and my mind was racing. I wanted to know about heaven, about God, about what happens after we die. But there was one question that had always scared me and fascinated me at the same time. When will the world end? Jesus looked at me with gentle understanding when I finally blurted out, "When will the world end?" He sighed, as if he'd heard this question countless times. "That's not something to fear, Kayla," he began softly. "One day, I will come back to make all things right, but don't be afraid of it. Instead, be ready." I tried to wrap my head around this. "How will we know when it's close?" I asked. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to hold galaxies. "There will be signs, wars, natural disasters, and many who will turn away from God. But those who love God should keep doing good things, keep loving, and stay hopeful." I felt a mix of awe and relief. There was a beauty in the idea that the end wasn't about destruction, but renewal, like cleaning up a messy room so that something better can take its place. Jesus led me on. We walked by a serene river that sparkled like diamonds under a sunless sky. I bent down to touch the water, which felt cool and revitalizing. Instantly, a wave of joy coursed through me. I noticed animals nearby, a lion nuzzling a lamb, birds of every color imaginable singing in perfect harmony. None of them fought or seemed afraid. Everything lived in perfect peace. Jesus explained, "This is the world as it was meant to be, where creation is in harmony. No pain, no suffering." We continued on until we reached a sprawling city with walls made of precious stones. The streets looked like they were made of gold so pure you could see right through them. Light was everywhere, but there was no sun, only the glow of God's presence. It was a kind of light that didn't hurt your eyes. It felt like being wrapped in a warm blanket of love. We passed people I recognized from Bible stories: Moses, David, Mary. They all beamed at me, greeting me like an old friend. For a moment, I felt a pang of wonder. Why do they seem like family? But somehow, in this place, Everyone felt like family. Each person radiated a pure kind of joy. At the heart of the city stood a golden stand holding the biggest book I'd ever seen. Its cover shimmered with gemstones, each one reflecting the brilliant light. I stared in awe as Jesus said, "This is the book of life. It contains the names of all who love and follow God." A wave of nervous excitement washed over me. "Is my name in there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled gently. "Yes, it is, and there's room for more." Relief washed over me like a cool breeze. Somehow I understood. We're all invited here, but we have to accept the invitation. Eventually, we arrived at the center of the city, where a majestic throne sparkled with a brilliant light. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, glowing not from reflections but from within. I sensed it was God's very presence. Songs rose from every corner, voices and instruments merging in a melody so divine, it took my breath away. It felt like the entire city was alive in worship, and I wanted to join them forever. But then Jesus turned to me, sadness flickering across his face. "Kayla, it's almost time for you to return." My heart sank. I didn't want to leave. How could I leave a place so perfect? A place where I felt no pain, no fear, only love. "Do I have to?" I asked, my voice trembling. He nodded gently. "You still have a purpose on earth. People need to hear about God's love and hope. It won't hurt when you go back, and I will be with you always, even if you can't see me." His arms encircled me one last time, filling me with a love that I promised myself I'd never forget. I closed my eyes, and the brilliant light surrounding us began to fade. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in my hospital bed. The room was chaos. Alarms were blaring, nurses shouted medical orders, and doctors frantically worked around me. Then, in a sudden shift, my heart monitor steadied. My parents gasped. My mom dropped into the chair beside the bed, sobbing into her hands. My dad clutched me so tightly I thought he might break a rib. The doctors looked stunned, as if they'd seen a ghost. They kept saying words like miraculous recovery and spontaneous remission, but I knew the truth. I had been healed in heaven. Over the next few days, they ran test after test, each one confirming that the disease, which had almost killed me, was just gone. The hospital discharged me with my parents in a flood of relief and tears. At first, my mom and dad thought maybe my visions were just hallucinations. But as I recounted every detail, down to the indescribable colors of the flowers and the feel of the water on my hands, they grew quiet and listened. My mom squeezed my hand and whispered, "God works in mysterious ways." My dad's eyes were red, though he tried to smile. When I finally returned to school, everything felt different. The hallways, the classrooms, the noisy cafeteria, it all seemed more vibrant, more precious. I remember sitting outside one day, just watching the sunlight hit the leaves of a tree and thinking, that light is just a small taste of what I saw. People asked me how I was feeling, and I told them about my experience. Some were curious, some skeptical, and others politely nodded but seemed unconvinced. I didn't mind. My job wasn't to force anyone to believe. It was simply to share what had happened and let God work in their hearts. From that point on, my life had a new purpose: to love God and love people in the most authentic way I could. I stopped holding grudges, even against people who'd bullied me. It just seemed pointless to hang on to anger. I wanted to reflect the kind of peace and love I'd felt in heaven. I got involved in volunteering, animal shelters, homeless shelters, visiting the elderly. Everywhere I went, I shared my story, not in a pushy way, but as a message of hope. I remembered Jesus' words about the end times. People will grow cold, disasters will happen, and some will turn away from God. But I also remembered he said we shouldn't be afraid. Instead, we should keep loving, keep helping, and be ready. My best friend Nina once asked me, "What if all this is made up? Aren't you worried people might think you're crazy?" I smiled and told her, "They can think what they want, but after everything I've seen and felt, I'd be crazy not to share it. Years passed, and I grew older, watching world events through the lens of what Jesus had told me. Wars sprang up here and there, natural disasters seemed more frequent, and people's faith sometimes wavered. But there were also moments of incredible kindness, neighbors helping neighbors in times of crisis, communities coming together to support each other. Everywhere I looked, I saw the potential for love, for little sparks of heaven on earth. I went to college and studied counseling, driven by a desire to comfort people in their darkest times. At every opportunity, through lectures, volunteer events, or casual conversations, I'd gently share my story. Some folks found renewed faith or hope, others remained politely skeptical. But that was okay. I knew that every seed of love planted has the potential to grow. Eventually, I got married to a wonderful man who also had a passion for helping others. We raised children, teaching them to love God, love people, and never lose hope. I wrote a book about my near-death experience, hoping to reach more people than I ever could in person. Letters and emails poured in, some from people who were suicidal, some from skeptics who found comfort in the possibility that maybe there was more beyond this life. Each time I read one of those letters, I felt a warmth in my heart. I remembered that day in heaven when Jesus told me to share his love.